Good morning for WGRV. This is Reid Seals, and I'm here with Greene County Mayor Kevin Morrison for our monthly interview. Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning, Reid. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, too. Now, first question. Now that the Commission approved appealing the denial of motion for a stay of appeal in the Clerk Master lawsuit, what happens next?
The next thing to happen, Reid, is for the briefs to be prepared and submitted to the Supreme Court, and that's essentially all that's to be done. The attorney for the county commission has determined that the total cost is going to be somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000. The commission made the decision Tuesday night to refer that appeal to the Supreme Court. So that's where we're going. As quick as essentially the paragraphs are written, referring it to the Supreme Court, then they'll either hear the case or not hear the case, and then a final judgment will be rendered at that level. So.
The convenience centers were mentioned on Tuesday. What would it take to increase what recyclables the convenience center can take, like more than just the 1 and 2 plastics, for example?
Right. The biggest thing that keeps us from recycling more materials is having a market, if you will, for those recyclables. Right now, there's a market for cardboard, plastic, those types of things. But for instance, a thing that we do collect in the convenience centers, which is glass, we're not currently have a market for that. We expect to very soon, and we're working with a lot of our waste partners here in Greene County as well as in the region to address some of those issues, to recycle more of those types of things. I've had a lot of people that have offered some great ideas as far as recycles. Household batteries, for instance, is a great thing, in my view, to keep out of the landfill. Right now, those things all go to the landfill, as well as the glass, but it's largely because we don't have a market for it. We certainly don't want to do away with that, because if there ever is a market that emerges that we can utilize, then we have to start that process all over again. People sort of have to be trained to segregate their glass, their plastic, their cardboard, that sort of thing. And we don't necessarily want to do that, go through that learning curve again. So we keep it there, segregated, hoping that there will be a market that will open up or that we can tap, and then we can recycle more things.
A citizen approached the commission about restricting the amount of cats a person can have. What would it take to get that passed? And do we currently have one about dogs being restricted?
No, there's really nothing on the books. And when I say the books, I'm talking about Tennessee Code Annotated. We've had a lot of calls, a lot of concerned folks, particularly our animal and pet folks, the rescue people, the Humane Society, our animal control. Of course, with all the very adverse cold weather, about care of their pets. But Tennessee Code Annotated basically says nothing about defining what an adequate shelter, for instance, for animals, either dogs or cats, what that is. And then we've had a number of cases around the county that we're dealing with that present health hazards, nuisance hazards, as far as just excess animals that people can't take care of. And I'm sure those folks, we all have a big heart for animals. We're charged by God that we have dominion over animals, which means we're supposed to take care of them. And in that regard, I think some people, because of the bigness of their heart, can somewhat become overwhelmed. And when they do, then that can become a nuisance for their neighbors. And we have a number of those cases around the county. With cats in particular, cats are a predatory animal, so they roam to find food, and they're not necessarily something that stays close to their food source like a dog would. And therein lies the problem. They go out foraging for food. If they're in excess of number, then they're obviously causing problems. We heard about one of the cases in particular that resulted in a civil action that was heard in court. Very heartbreaking stories on behalf of the homeowner who had problems with with their property and health issues, as well as for the animals themselves, because there's inbreeding and neglect and that sort of thing, and that's very sort of heartbreaking. So, but Tennessee Code Annotated essentially says that there's nothing, no restrictions on numbers, no restrictions or definitions on types of adequate shelter. They just talk about food, water, and shelter. So the Animal Control Committee would be looking at very soon. We were collaborating with Washington County and the Humane Society up there, as well as other counties here in the region, because we all have the same problem. Mayor Joe Grandy from Washington County and I are looking at, for instance, mentioning sort of these deficiencies, not only to our local legislators, but to the governor when we go see him. But right now, what can be done really is local ordinances to address these types of issues. But once again, you have to proceed slowly and deliberately, because anything that's passed we'd have to live with. But how that would be passed is that would be done locally through the county legislative body.
Can you explain the resolution about restricting the commission's communication with outside attorneys representing Greene County and why you think it didn't pass?
The resolution was introduced by one of the commissioners, essentially as sort of the idea was a cost control measure, was to try to make sure that information that was coming out of the lawsuit or legal advice coming from the county's attorney would be channeled to one source, and that would either be our legal team, our attorney, Roger Woolsey, or myself in the county mayor's office, and that if one of the commissioners had a question or a concern about what was happening or some type of research toward the lawsuit, then they would direct their questions either through our county attorney or my office, and then we would get the information to avoid, for instance, multiple commissioners calling the law firm, speaking to the lawyer, perhaps asking the same questions, getting the same information, and then those multiple calls being billed back to the county. So it was a way to, again, ask one question for the entire group, get the answer, disseminate that information from a central source, and then that way you only have one billing from the attorney. I think the reason that didn't pass is in a lawsuit, obviously you have varying sides. People have different opinions about what needs to be done, what has been done, what hasn't been done, where they stand, if they want to settle, that sort of thing. And if there could be the perception that, for instance, that under one entity, that one entity could be channeling or guiding the case in one direction or another based on their personal. If I had, a personal feeling about the direction of the case, then I could manipulate that information if that information all had to come through me. And essentially, once again, the county legislative body is the funding source. So they're the ones that writes the checks. They're the ones that has to decide, okay, what are we paying for? So I think the reason that it didn't pass is the individual commissioners wanted to be able to, number one, do their own research, and that was brought up in Tuesday night's meeting, and they wanted to ask their own questions and formulate their own opinions without having to channel that through my office or through the legal office, which is perfectly fine. That's a legitimate concern, particularly for future lawsuits. And one of the previous lawsuits or legal actions that the county was involved in was sort of cited as a source, and there were some excellent points made by some of the commissioners that were here in that case as to how that could have been manipulated or changed based on the passage, for instance, of this rule. So the county commission, in essence, turned down sort of a precedent-setting resolution, which I think that was probably the right decision.
Well, I want to thank Greene County Mayor Kevin Morrison for joining us this morning. This is Reid Seals, and you're listening to AM 1340 and 99.5 FM WGRV.